Previously on Chaos Head Noah.
人がいっぱいだね。これロボットさん ?IR2 だって。セナさん
The sound of gritting teeth escaped from Sena's lips. Her expression was far more grim than usual, and the hand holding the essay trembled with anger.
そうか。西条が IR2 を生み出した張本人か。
And what is IR2 exactly? Her voice forcefully stifled. She crushed a sheet of paper in her fist.
やっぱり導きだったんだわ。君と私が出会ったのは。
Quietly, dispassionately, Ayase narrated about what I could only call a totally chuny storyline.
君の邪神はとても強大。だからこそ言うことなしなのよ。黒騎士としての素質は。君が今経験している苦しみはすべて神罰。大いなる意志による試練なの。それを乗り越えた時に理想度は召喚されるわ。君の手に必ず。そして現れるのよ。邪神の黒き大蛇。あらゆる崩壊を飲み込み、邪神王の身を砕くことのできる。同質にして異質なるものが。
By Dark Colossal Serpent, are you perhaps referring to the thing in my essay drawing by any chance?
繰り返しお伝えします。今日午後3時半ごろ、警視庁渋谷署はいわゆるニュージェネレーションの凶器と呼ばれる渋谷で発生した一連の殺人事件のうち、
I see my suspect is right in there in the picture.
9月29日に起きた通称貼り付け殺人事件の容疑者を逮捕しました。殺人容疑で逮捕されたのは無職狛枝慎吾容疑者25歳です。容疑については先ほど渋谷署で行われた記者会見の通り、今のところ太田久さん殺害についてのみで、他の事件に関する容疑は今後追及していく構えです。狛枝容疑者は太田さん殺害については容疑を認めており、交際している女性が太田さんにしつこくつけ回され、カッとなって首を絞めた。しかしゾンビだったため死なず、貼り付けにして動きを止めたなどと意味不明の供述をしています。警察の調べでは、狛枝容疑者には現在交際している女性がいないことが明らかになっており、薬物を摂取していた疑いもあるとみて捜査を進めています。
Nozomi? The horribly pained voice that come through the phone was unmistakably Nozomi's.
ナミ。
何なの？右手を返して。
My vision was overwhelmed by a blinding sheet of deep crimson. With no idea what had just happened, I turned my face to the light. And when I looked on top of the container house, there she stood. Yep, called it. Aoi Sena, D-sword in hand. The source of the light was her D-sword, glimmering against the sky. But something was strange. When I'd seen it before, Sena's D-sword had emitted a blue glow. The sound vanished. The wind stopped.
答える。
Her voice was sharp, her glare cold. Her eyes glistened with unmistakable animosity.
これを書いたのはお前か?
As she spoke, she thrust out a piece of paper with IR2 scribbled on it. My essay. For some reason, it was all scrunched up. Why did Sena have that? Why was Sena here?
その男が何をしたか知っているのか? IR2 という公式を。
知ってるよ。
Sena had been interrupted by a quiet, sorrowful, yet decisive response. Upon hearing that, Sena tightened the grip on her D-sword.
それなら
タクを覚醒させればもっと大変なことになる。
その前に殺す。
あなたには無理だよ。
Sena decided that there was no point in talking further. She brandished her sword in a lie stance. I'm sure I said that wrong. Before her, Rimi stood readily. Nishijo Takumi lay about 5 long strides away from her. At this distance, it would take 3 seconds to resolve things completely. Without hesitation, Sena rushed toward Rimi from the front.
どうしようもなかった。私はお前の母さんを生贄に捧げるしかなかったんだ。
What the hell?
黙れ。
母さんの最後、とても安らかなものだったよ。だからセナ、安心してほしい。母さんのおかげで素晴らしい実験結果が出た。母さんは世界のために役立ったんだ。お前も母さんの功績を誇っていい。
黙れよ!
Blood rushed to Sena's head, rendering her no longer able to see anything other than the man that stood before her. Your father, by any chance?
お前のせいで私の家族は。
I was completely bewildered. She was launching nothing but raw emotion at me. What the hell did she think I'd done? I hadn't done anything. I hadn't screwed with anyone's lives, as far as we know. And I certainly didn't know a damn thing about Sena's family. I was harmless as could be.
無害だと。
She'd read my mind.
お前が生み出したものが世界を滅ぼすかもしれないっていうのに。
Destroy the entire world? Fortuny shit again? I turned my gaze to Rimi for help, but she had her back to us. She stared vacantly at the darkening sky.
無駄だよ。
Her figure, her voice, was the sheer loneliness they gave off. Merely my imagination?
タクは何も知らないから。
IR2. The chaos infesting Shibuya right now had started from this. Talk about an absurd accusation. There was no way in hell some random doodle could affect anything, let alone of that magnitude. I just doodled the thing on a complete whim when I was bored or something. Probably. It was a long time ago, so I didn't remember it all that well. But I didn't know there was no real meaning behind it. I just copied down the numbers I'd seen in a dream. It was a dream related to whose eyes are those eyes, which I'd written about on the front. I'd used those words all the time since even before I'd written it, and whenever I had, it would all take shape in my dreams and more. Within one of those dreams were those numbers. And so it continues. Greetings, my name is Neosekken, and welcome back to my Let's Play of Chaos Head Noah. So, a crap ton of stuff happened in the last episode, especially towards the second half. And, well, we're clearly far from done on that front, going by the scene that we're looking at here and now. So, Bill Nye, you got some big update for everybody here on Noah 2? I have a feeling I'm not going to like it, but please, enlighten us. Particular formula, you say? Let me guess. IR2?
これは人類史上未だ回答が見つかっていないとされているもの。
ミレニアム7のうちの一つかね。
Millennium Prize problems. A series of 7 math problems that were published in the year 2000 CE by the Clay Mathematics Institute in the United States. The 7 problems had never been solved prior to their publication, and a $1 million prize was promised to anyone that managed to solve any of the 7. As of 2007, only one of the problems has been solved, and there are 6 remaining. I wonder how many have been solved now.
億単位の懸賞金がかけられているという数学界で未だ未解決の7つの問題か。
いいえ、その7つの中には入っていません。
Oh, so it's even more special.
ですが、実はミレニアム7はもともと問題が8つあった。公開前に1つだけ削除されたのです。
So, I guess the reason why it was expunged is because of, well, its world-changing qualities, as we've been coming to find out, like in the last episode.
それがノア2に組み込まれている方程式だと。
削除された理由は？
世界に最悪をまき散らす可能性があるためというところです。
一体どのような数式なのだ？
基本相互作用における電磁気力を想定した共鳴現象。それを表す計算式です。
Fundamental interactions. I feel like I've heard of this before. In physics, this refers to any of the 4 basic forces that interact between elementary particles. Okay, yeah, I do know this. These are electromagnetic interaction, gravitational interaction, weak interaction, and strong interaction. A theory that explains all elementary particles and the 4 fundamental interactions in a unified manner has yet to be established. If such a theory were ever finalized, it is predicted that it would be able to consistently explain everything from the subatomic scale to the far corners of the universe. Fascinating.
これにより、特定の電磁パルスと受容体とが近接作用することで発現する未知の力が解明されました。
What is this humming noise I hear in the background?
各国が30年以上かけて開発し積み上げてきた沈黙の兵器の研究成果を一瞬にして過去のものとしてしまったんですよ。
その問題に回答を見つけた者は神になるに等しいというわけだ。
So it seems.
それを君が果たしたというわけかね。
それはとても不思議な場所から見つかりました。子供の落書きというね。IR2。
Called it.
ノア2のいわゆるハードウェア部分はこの公式によって神に匹敵する能力を手に入れました。あとはソフトウェア部分に相当するギガロマニアックスのコードサンプルを集めればノア2は本格的に稼働し我々の望むもの全てを実現してくれるでしょう。
かのアインシュタインが現代に生きていればと思うよ。 彼は高い能力を持つギガロマニアックスだったと聞く。
As if we had any more reason to think he was special.
家庭の話よりも現状がどうなっているかだ。ギガロマニアックスは世界中に数えるほどしかいないというではないか。大丈夫なのか？
I wonder what what Einstein's D sword would look like then.
すでに5人分のサンプルは確保しました。
脳圧稼働に十分な数は集まったようだね。
ならば結構。
ただサンプルが多ければ多いほどノア2の能力は向上します。特にどうしてもサンプルを採取したいギガロマニアックスの少年が一人いましてね。
だからといって計画の遅延は許されんぞ。
ノア2の本格稼働はいつ頃になりそうなのかね。
稼働前に最終実験としてサードメルトを行います。
The third melt. Is this like some kind of third impact level event or something, a la Neon Genesis Evangelion? Because I'm already not liking the sound of this thing, especially if that's what this is. I mean, the melt. Are you gonna melt a bunch of people?
また地震を起こそうと？
予測規模は？
想定では関東大震災と同レベル。
The Great Kanto Earthquake, huh? Why don't I look that up real fast? Great Kanto Earthquake. The Great Japan Earthquake of 1923. The date was September 1st, 1923. Okay, and the event was the Great Kanto Earthquake, at the time considered the worst natural disaster ever to strike quake-prone Japan. The initial jolt was followed by a few minutes later by a 40-foot-high tsunami. A series of towering waves swept away thousands of people. Then came fires, roaring through the wooden houses of Yokohama and Tokyo, the capital, burning everything and everyone in their path. The death toll would be about 140,000, including 44,000 who have sought refuge near Tokyo's Sumida River in the first few hours, only to be immolated by a freak pillar of fire known as a dragon twist. Jesus Christ. The Temblor destroyed two of Japan's largest cities and traumatized the nation. It also whipped up nationalist and racist passions. I don't know what race has to do with this, but okay. And the quake may have emboldened... Yeah, okay. I guess I can tell who wrote this thing. But yeah, I already got the gist. I got the gist.
関東大震災クラスだと？
マグニチュード 7.9 だったかな。
7.9. Holy shit. No wonder it was so destructive. Wait. If you mean the third melt in a literal sense here, are you gonna weaponize dragon twists or something to melt people?
現在の建築基準と免震対策レベルを考えれば町にかつてほどの大きな損害を及ぼすことはないでしょ
う。だが犠牲者の数はファーストセカンドの日ではなかろう。
およそ5000人ほどといったところです。
Still a high number.
少なく見積もってですが問題が
責任は貴様が取るのだろうな。
腹でも切って死んでみせますか？
Yes, please. I think that would actually do the whole world a massive favor if you commit seppuku right here and now.
これが最終実験です。サードメルトが予定通りの成果を上げたとき、ノア2は 完全なる完成を見る。世界の可能性は我らの手の中に。
この公式をお前が生み出した瞬間、世界は分岐したんだ。
分岐って。
What? Like with routes? This wasn't an eroge.
タク、もう行こう。話聞く必要なんてないよ。
I disagree. Rimi pulled out on my hand, pleading me to go inside my room. Her demeanor oozed feelings of desperation. Rimi was afraid of something.
葵さんが言ってることは全部嘘っぱちだし。
嘘はそっちだろ。
葵さん、もう帰って。タクの前から消えてよ。
Who should I believe?
たかが数式になんでそんなに目くじら立てるんだよ。
本当に何も分かってないのか。アインシュタインが唱えた E=MC の事情、これが発表されたことで核兵器が開発されるという未来が生まれたように。
Oh, so that's the formula that created the nukes, huh? E equals MC... I don't know how to say that. Oh, squared, I think. 2. An equation in the theory of special relativity, as defined by Albert Einstein. It stands for energy, E, equals mass times the speed of light, squared. This equation shows that mass and energy are equivalent. I've never been a mathematic whiz, so this stuff is a bit above my pay grade when on the intellectual side of things. And I just notice her eyes still blink while I have the pause menu up. We got ourselves a time breaker here, ladies and gents.
お前の生み出した IR2 もまた E=MC の事情と同じ、いや、それ以上の影響力を世界に与えている。
So, would I end up creating super nukes? Because, well, actually no, those have already been invented. Tsar Bomba immediately comes to mind for me personally when it comes to super nukes. So, and hydrogen bombs are also a thing. Maybe I could create a miniature black hole or a sun and weaponize that somehow with IR2. That'd be something.
IR2 は沈黙の兵器を現実のものとした。
沈黙の兵器？
思考盗撮、視覚投影、五感制御。
Ah, so so a huge chunk of the bizarre stuff I've been seeing up until this point, along with some of the patents and research documents I've been going over. They're all research into silent weapons, huh? Wasn't that the patent and technology Sena had told me about before? The one that she was investigating?
ギガロマニアックスは特別。いや、異常ではなくなる。これからはこの忌々しい力を誰もが自由に使えるようになるんだ。IR2 を元に作られた装置によってな。もっとも、その前に一握りの腐った連中に独占され、人々は気づかないうちに家畜同然の立場になるよう洗脳されてしまうだろうが。
How would I have known all this? Go on and on about this shit until the end of time. It still wouldn't change that I didn't know anything. Even if Sena was speaking the truth, I never would have intentionally tried to make something so horrifying. Not in a million years. It was just a doodle made by a kid. I hadn't done anything wrong.
IR2
それはギガロマニアックスの力のことをキュッピーンって説明したものなんだ。やっぱりあのおじさんが言ってたのは本当だったのら。一番重要なのはその目、誰の目を生み出した少年なんだって。それってたくみちゃんのコートだったんだね。
Kosupi spoke in a carefree tone. I would never be able to act as innocent as she could. Just like me, Rimi also showed no signs of answering. Sena, meanwhile, opened her eyes wide and raised her head with a start. She rose to her feet, staggering. Why was her footing so unsteady? Did it have something to do with what Rimi had done to her earlier? That'd be my first guess.
小杖、お前今なんて言った？
ホビ？
Sena drew closer to the puzzled girl, pressing her for answers.
おじしゃんって誰のことだ？
コズピーに理想度の大切さを教えてくれた人。東京に来て初めて話した人なの。なんかね、ふぎゅーって鼻つまみたくなっちゃう格好してて、へんてこなこと書いた板持ってたの。世界は終わるとかとか。
なんでそれを早く言わなかった？
You didn't ask. Would be my guess.
そんなこと言われても。
あいつだ。やっと見つけた。
Me, Rimi, and Kozupi, the three of us, unable to understand what Sena meant, could only watch with confusion as Sena's blood-curdling demeanor boiled and bubbled.
私はやっとあいつを殺せる。
There had once been a certain experiment involving a certain scientific railgun.
It is green.
But it was an experiment she had known nothing of. She was a perfectly ordinary housewife and had been blessed with a second child in her womb before turning 40. Second child. Okay, I'm assuming the baby is Sena, but who's the second child? No. Perhaps perfectly ordinary might not have fit her quite so well. After all, her eldest daughter was already old enough to enter high school. A 15-year gap from the second child. That is quite the gap. She had been slightly worried that her eldest daughter, adolescent that she was, would oppose the pregnancy. However, the exact opposite proved to be true. Her daughter's heart sang when she heard the news. Her husband, an established scientist, often lost himself in his research and faith, and rarely ever came home to his family. Oh, wait a minute, maybe the elder daughter is Sena. But when he was home, he always did his best to be a good husband and father. So while she had some dissatisfactions, they would never surpass the love she held for her husband. Her second child was delivered without issue. A healthy girl of 2,579 grams. She named the child Amana. Soon after, her husband was unfortunately made to transfer far away. Her husband held no captivity to support himself with even the most basic of life skills, forcing her to ask her stable daughter to go with him and tend to her father's needs. Since she was now living alone with the newborn Mana, they then opted to move to an affordable company housing, as per her husband's plan. She had initially been living in an apartment within the suburbs, but this made transport inconvenient. The new company house, however, was in the best area of Shibuya, and many of her husband's colleagues' families lived close by. Her considerate husband claimed that, because of this, there would be nothing to worry about in her times of need, including when she needed help with the baby. Every room in the company house was spacious, and she particularly favored the bedroom. One wall was home to a large mirror, and the opposite wall had an even larger window. From there she could view the luscious greenery of Yoyogi Park. She then went on to quickly befriend a housewife living close by, and received extraordinary treatment from the company, namely, being provided a housekeeper. She was proud of her husband for holding such an important position within his company, one that allowed her to live in such a luxurious way, and so her life without worries nor dissatisfaction continued. Okay, could you please put a pacifier in the baby's mouth or something? This has been going on for a good while now, and I'm kind of getting sick of it. 2 years passed. While Mana had experienced delayed growth, she had grown into a healthy child, all while not contracting any major illnesses. She was a very pampered child. If she did not cradle Mana in her arms, the girl would start crying in a voice so shrill, it could shatter even the thickest glass. Regrettably, she had fallen ill about a month prior. A particularly grave symptom was a fierce tinnitus, something she suffered from throughout most hours of the day. Fortunately for her, the housekeeper and the housewife next door were more than willing to assist her with taking care of Mana. Regardless of the help she received, she was essentially joined at the hip with Mana, and was never able to part from her for even a moment. Even when going to the bathroom, even when taking a bath. If a thought were to even cross her mind about having the housekeeper cradle the baby for a short while, Mana would detect these intentions and immediately burst into tears. The baby could detect the intentions. Does that mean Mana was a gigglomaniac too? Contrary to what one might surmise, she actually found endearment in how much Mana clung to her. But, due to the inseparability of the two, she continued to live a life where she could never take even a single step out of her own home. Her lifestyle was entirely supported by the housekeeper and the housewife. For her, meeting the two had become her true saving grace. Oh, thank God it's over. However, over time, something odd began to happen with the two helpers. During a friendly chat in the living room that occurred a week prior, the housewife had spontaneously vomited without warning. Paying no heed to the confusion she showed, the housewife then rushed outside. She had not seen her since, leaving her to worry that she had perhaps fallen ill. Concerned, she decided to ask the housekeeper if she could check on her. As the housekeeper left that day, she made her request, concluding with an "I'd love your help tomorrow as well, dear." And yet, when the housekeeper heard these words, she suddenly burst into tears, and could only nod again and again as she departed. What the hell is going on here? The tinnitus that had been tormenting her had become fiercer that night, to the point where it felt as if her head itself might split apart. She tried calling an ambulance, but the line refused to connect. What the hell? Somebody cut the lines? She then tried going outside to ask the neighboring housewife for help, but even that proved too much for her. Throughout all of this, her daughter had continued to cry incessantly, further agitating her pain. In order to endure this terrible pain, she embraced her beloved Mana. And as she did so, both the tinnitus and the crying abruptly stopped. The pain in her head vanished just as suddenly, almost as if it had never been there to begin with. What if these two have some kind of psychic link with one another that requires them to be as close to each other as possible, i.e. physical contact? Less increased distance between the two causes them both physical pain. She then looked down, only to see that the child was now holding a now mummified corpse. Wait, let me read that again. She then looked down, only to see that the child she was holding was now a mummified corpse. Oh, shit. In spite of how heavily it had been crying until that very moment, the body had suddenly become a desiccated, rotting mound of flesh. One that gave off the most repulsive stench. It happened right as she picked Mana up. Assuming genetics have some kind of role in how and whether or not one becomes a gigalomaniac, then the one theory that I can think of that could explain this, unless whatever is said next proves me very wrong, is that maybe her powers she had powers of her own, and well, incontinence in using them when she went to pick Mana up basically resulted in this, if that makes any sense. Maybe some power hers or something ended up draining the child of all life. It's probably not what it is, but it's the only thing I can think of. And so, before she could ever realize it was all an experiment, her mind broke. There had once been a certain experiment, but it was an experiment that ran different to how he had hypothesized. Oh, I see. I see now. The reason why her life ended up turning into the way it did, where she could never leave her house, because she constantly had to hold the baby with her at all times. That's all an illusion that was created, probably through that helmet. The reality is she's in a laboratory room. Then that baby she's holding, maybe at the end of that experiment, right before her mind broke, she somehow ended up seeing the thing she was actually holding, which was a mummified corpse. And I assume then that the housewife and the other lady, they are research assistants. He was a scientist at Nozomi Technology, a follower of the Cosmic Church of the Divine Light, the man at the center of Nozomi's strictly confidential Project Noah, and the man that had deciphered FUN squared 10 times INT squared 40 equals IR2. He had offered his wife on the verge of childbirth as a test subject for the experiment. While that had been an instruction from the founder that he revered, it had been just as much his own suggestion, all to ensure the success of the experiment. He was christened the Mana Experiment. It was christened the Mana Experiment, after the codename given to their second daughter. His eldest daughter of 15 was placed in a cosmic church of the Divine Light institution, all while he observed his confined wife and infant child for 24 hours a day. His wife had been led to believe the place she resided in was a company house, but in reality it was a test site that Nozomi Technology had prepared, a site containing the Noah 2 prototype he was developing. Mind reading, visual projection, and control over the 5 senses. In order to research the effects of such practices, he locked his wife and daughter Mana in the site as test subjects. Not much was known about the effects of electromagnetic radiation on the human body, so he very much intended to halt the experiment immediately if his wife or child showed any strange abnormalities. The experiment was then met with an unfortunate accident soon after it began. Mana passed away at 1 month of age. Her cause of death, unknown. It was an accident nobody could have prevented. He was overcome with sorrow and attempted to bring the experiment to a close. And yet, such a thing was not permitted to him.
実に興味深いではないですか。
You're Bill Nye. Those were the words of his employer. His employer was referring to the bizarre sight visible within the experiment. His wife did not seem to recognize Mana's death as real, instead treated her remains as if they were still her child. In her eyes, Mana had never died. But in truth, these things were all a simple projection, a reality only she was privy to. This was an effect of the Noah 2 prototype, and in a certain sense, the situation provided an optimal opportunity to test its capabilities. Consequently, he had his wishes disregarded. Eventually, even he came to think that continuing the experiment would be best, for his wife's sake. Looking upon the one-way mirror, his wife would embrace the corpse of their child, and lived her every day in blissful happiness. She would gaze through the window toward the greenery of Yoyogi Park, but in reality, the window was a mere wallpaper, and the scenery a projection. And yet, she simply smiled at the view, all while gently tending to her child as she cooed. Staff belonging to the research team would take care of his wife, with one playing the role of a neighboring housewife, and the other a housekeeper. As long as the experiment continued, her mind would never break. As such, he told himself this was all for his wife's sake. Though in truth, perhaps his mind had broken far before his wife's ever could. At some point in time, his goal had changed from completing Noah 2 to forcing his wife to continue living in an endless dream. After continuing the experiment for 2 years, his employer suddenly announced an end to the project.
データは十分取れました。ノア2本格稼働は間近です。この実験ももう続ける意味はないでしょう。
He vehemently opposed this, his desperation evident. And yet, this passion had him branded a traitor, and he was subsequently removed from the project. As a gesture of kindness, he was permitted to be present at the test site on the final day of the experiment, albeit within restraints. and with him, his daughter, of whom he had not seen across those 2 full years, was forced to be present. A look of bewilderment rose to her face when she noticed him.
父さん、これはどういうこと？母さんに何をしたの？母さんが抱いているのは一体。
He was unable to answer. His guilt over what he had done prevented him from looking his daughter in the eye. Meanwhile, the start of a ghastly ritual was drawing near. The housewife had long since become unable to endure Mana's rotting stench, and the housekeeper had left the test site in tears in response to his wife's words. Then, the equipment stopped. The dream ended, and his wife broke. In her eyes, what was once her child had suddenly transformed into a mummy. A sight that brought her to scratch at her scalp, tear out her hair, dig her fingernails into the flesh of her face, and then begin to ravenously devour the desiccated body of her own child. Through every tear of flesh, she continued to laugh maniacally, bang her head against the wall, before eventually, she took a kitchen knife, drove the blade into her own eyes, and died right where she stood. The daughter cried and screamed as she watched her mother's horrific end from beyond the one-way mirror. His daughter was then taken away by 2 researchers, with one taking hold of each arm. He was not even granted the opportunity to pursue his only remaining relative.
すまない。すまない。
He blamed himself for everything, believing he had reaped what he himself had sowed. Well, I can't really disagree with you there, buddy. Regardless of his reasons, when he had resolved to continue the experiment 2 years ago, it had been obvious how things would end. Mere days after bearing witness to his wife's death, he vanished. And now, nary a soul knew of his current whereabouts. Jesus. Well, I can certainly understand why she wants to kill him now. If I were in her position, I would too. After everything had settled, Sena had gone on to interrogate Kozupi about something with bloodshot eyes, and then after doing that for a bit, she ran off somewhere on her own. Kozupi had chased after her, but I, meanwhile, had just been staying put, still incredibly confused as to why Sena had become so obsessive all of a sudden. And now, I was trudging to Shimo Kitazawa. My parents' house was only a short distance away. Walking from my base to it took less than half an hour. Could Nanami be there? Where's Rimi? Is she still with us? Though not as busy as Shibuya itself, the roads of Shimokitazawa were fairly crowded. I was still being hit by the aftermath of that Esper debacle. Namely, some passerby looked at me with mocking sneers, while others even took pictures of me on their phones. Overwhelmed by embarrassment and humiliation, I hurried along the road to home.
ごめんね。
Rimi's eyes were pointing to the ground as she said that. She was walking a bit behind me, and in the time we'd spent moving along, she'd already repeated those words over 10 times. Well, you should be. You lied to me. Repeatedly. Ongoing.
ごめん。
No matter how much she apologized, I had no way of answering. I didn't know anything about Rimi. Nothing had changed ever since we'd first met. And yet, she supported me. She stayed by my side. But at the end of the day, there was still so much I didn't know about her. Even so, I'd always brushed that issue out of my mind. Can't anymore. Perhaps it was because something in me knew that she wouldn't stay with me if I knew the truth. And that terrified me.
どうして僕と一緒にいてくれるの？
I worked up the courage and asked her what was on my mind. I asked her the reason why she would stay with a guy like me. Was it because she was trying to lure me into a trap the entire time? Just like Yua had? And yet, despite my suspicions, the answer she gave was nothing of the sort.
あなたに目覚めてほしくないの。普通の生活を送ってほしかった。
Didn't want me to awaken? Like, as a gigalomaniac? Rimi knew more about me than I did.
一体君は何者なの？
私は
Rimi hesitated a little.
私はタクの友達だって思ってる。友達でいたいな。
In other words, she was telling me to stop pushing. But there's no way I could stop there.
僕はギガロマニアックスなの。
そうとも言えるし、違うとも言える。
Ah, so I'm a Schrodinger's gigalomaniac, huh? Which was it? Was she trying to dodge the question?
君は IR2 のこと知ってたの？
聞いたことがあるだけ。
From who? She didn't say from who.
セナが言ってたのは本当なの？
嘘だよ。
Lies. Telling me it was all lies. Was a lie in and of itself. I could tell just from looking at her.
君は
I was about to ask more, but I held my tongue. Are you my enemy? Or are you my friend? Depending on the answer, I might have not been able to stay with Rimi. So I didn't ask. If I pretended that nothing had happened, I could keep on deceiving myself just as I had been up until now. That might be easier for me. Happier even. You can't keep running forever, Takumi. Sooner or later, reality and the truth is going to catch up to you, whether you want it to or not. And it's only going to be much more painful when it does. Be better to rip the band-aid off now and just deal with what comes, sooner rather than later. Okay. That's what I was gonna do. I was gonna keep being ignorant and keep living a lie. A lie told by Rimi. Let's be honest, Takumi, we know that's not gonna happen, because even if you try to commit to it, someone else will make sure that you won't. Whether it be Darth Spider, Nozomi, Sena, or God knows who else. Because unfortunately for you, Takumi, you're basically the man of the hour as far as my own understanding of all these events is concerned. There's no way in hell you're going to be left alone. Rimi had saved my ass so many times already, so there was no way any harm would come to me if I did that. I deserved to live a normal life, just like she'd said.
ありがとう。
I averted my eyes from her and swapped out my question for a few words of gratitude.
守ってくれて。
だから
I couldn't think of anything else to say, so I just continued walking toward my parents' house in silence. My eyes were eventually met with a familiar alleyway. It was a quiet, secluded residential area. Every now and then I could hear the faint sound of a train in the distance. I'd known this specific chunk of scenery ever since I was a little kid. This was where I'd grown up. I'd walked to both elementary school and middle school using this alleyway. If I headed through the narrow alleyway in front of me, my house would be right there. I was scared of seeing Nozomi again, but I had to know for certain whether her arm was still there. I stopped and took a deep breath to calm myself. And then, right when I was about to start walking again,
待って。
what's the problem now? I turned around to see Rimi on the verge of tears.
どうしても行くの？ねえ、行かないで。もう普通じゃいられなくなるよ。
I hate to break it to you, Rimi, but at this point, I could reasonably argue I don't have a normal life anymore already. And that there's really nowhere for me to go but forward.
私そんなの嫌だな。
What was that supposed to?
帰ろう。あのコンテナハウスに帰ろう。私タクが望む限りずっと一緒にいるから。それで一緒に学校に行って大臣と3人で他愛もない話をして、帰りに立ち食いそば屋さんとか CD ショップとかに寄って、そうやってこれからもやっていこうよ。
僕はナナミに会わなくちゃ。
いないよ、きっと。
Why was she so sure? Or was it just another lie? Would something bad happen to me if I went home?
私タクの悲しむ顔見たくない。
So you say.
もう謎かけみたいなことはやめてよ。
I'd had enough. She was telling me to stay ignorant forever. I couldn't go on like this, pretending like I knew nothing. Of course I couldn't. Each and every person I knew just kept hitting me with non-stop cryptic nonsense. It never ended. I really did want to stay ignorant. I really did.
実家に行っちゃいけない理由があるなら言ってよ。こんな中途半端なのうんざりなんだ。
Sick of it. Did I have any right to say that? Wasn't I the one who always half-assed everything? Who never said what I really meant? Yep. Was I the one who always ran away from everything? Yeah. I was. All the more reason to just keep doing that, from now until forever. It was time to go home. Rimi was right. I didn't need to see Nozomi at all. If I was planning on checking whether she had her right hand or not, then what the hell would I do if she didn't? Wouldn't that be all my fault? Nozomi would hate me. Resent me. All it would have done was solidify that I was a pathetic loser that couldn't even save his own little sister. If I left everything up in the air like it was now, I wouldn't have to be loaded with guilt. That's bullshit and you know it, Takumi. You'd still feel guilty. So, that's what I'd do. It was the optimal choice. Don't look at anything. No matter how many mysteries come your way, ignore them. Shut yourself away from the world.
ほんと世話が焼けるな。ナナがいないと何にもできないんだから。
ダメだ。
Nozomi's cheerful voice popped into my head.
ダメだよ。
If I ran away now, I wouldn't be able to face Nozomi for the rest of my life. I wouldn't be able to go back home for the rest of my life.
タク。
Well, it's not like I'm eagerly anticipating what we're going to find here either, Takumi, but all the same, I'm right here with you. We'll soldier on through this together. Whatever that's worth. I clenched my fists and stepped forward into the narrow alleyway that led to my parents' house. I was less than 50 meters away now. At first, I just speed walked. Then I started running toward the home I'd been raised in. 30 meters to go. 20 meters. 10 meters. 0 meters. And when I looked, the house I knew was gone. Was gone. How the fuck did I know?
あれ
The name on the door plate was wrong. It wasn't Nishijo. In fact, the entire shape of the house was wrong. It was far newer and nicer than the home I'd lived in. I looked around. I wondered if I'd mistaken one of the neighboring houses for mine. But I hadn't. Actually, none of the surrounding scenery lined up with my memories. I considered that maybe I'd gotten lost or taken the wrong alley, but there was no way that could have happened. I'd recognized the entire route until now. I knew for a fact I remembered the route. But my home wasn't at the end of it. After taking the path from my memories, the scenery that should have been there hadn't appeared, and a completely unfamiliar one had instead. Jamayas Vu. What should have been a familiar place felt like I was setting foot in it for the first time.
シャメビューだ。
違うよ。
Rimi stood right behind me. She had denied my words immediately.
この世界にタクの帰る場所はないの？
What? What? I'm just thinking back. It's all throughout, everything I've seen all throughout the game. Did some kind of big event happen at some point that could have foreshadowed this that I just missed? Just slipped under my radar? When did this happen? Wait. Given what happened to Sena's mother, and how all her senses were manipulated to the point where she basically lived in a completely fabricated world. Did Takumi's past actually happen? The home he remembered, the childhood he had growing up, the family that he grew up with. How many, if any, of those things were actually real? Nozomi seems to be real, but if his childhood was fabricated, then who the hell is Nozomi in relation to Takumi? What the hell is going on? On the sunset illuminated the lone corridor of the hospital. The lights were not turned on in this short period before night fell, rendering it fairly dim. The clamor of dinner time from before had calmed, and an eerie silence descended in its place. Shogun was slowly traveling down the corridor in his wheelchair. The creaking of the wheels echoed throughout the empty hall. Many nurses passed him by, but none spoke to him, nor even so much as glanced his way. Acting as though this was perfectly normal, Shogun continued to spin the wheels with his hands, emaciated skin and bone as they were. Still looking for Ami-chan, I see, whoever you are. When he passed in front of one of the rooms, a male patient known as Yamai called out to him. He pointed at him with his index finger, sounding a frantic cry. Together with Yamai, the nurse had a face of complete befuddlement. The nurse looked around, then looked at the man with a forced smile on her face. They can't even see him, can they? Despite the fact that Shogun was passing through the corridor right before her very eyes, the nurse spoke as if there was no one there at all.
Well,
clearly he can see Shogun. Yamaya became increasingly worked up as he continued to cry out. Shogun simply ignored him and silently turned right at the end of the hallway. The wall, which had been cream-colored up until that very moment, suddenly changed to black. And yet, even though that wall stood right in front of him, Shogun did not halt his wheelchair. I freaking knew it. Somehow I knew there was another room or another pathway through that black wall. Right before he was about to collide with it, the black wall suddenly vanished. It quite literally had vanished. After the wall disappeared, a hidden corridor appeared from beyond its past reign. Shogun continued straight through it. He traveled another 20 meters, before finally reaching a true dead end. At that dead end was a lone door to a hospital room. Shogun opened the door and headed inside. It was the Phantom Hospital room. The ghost story whispered about for many years. The tale of a room nobody knew of. And the person hospitalized within it, the name written upon the nameplate, was... What the hell? Shogun is me? Or am I Shogun? Rimi said that I was both a gigalomaniac and also not. The past that he thought he had up until now seems to have been a lie. Is Takumi actually real? Is he himself some kind of delusion brought to life? Or is it the other way around in Shogun? What am I? From the train windows, an indigo blue could be seen permeating the sky. The trains of the Yamanote line grew chaotic as businessmen and students alike made their way back to their rooms. Two of its passengers, Kusunoki Yua and Yasuji Ban, stood shoulder to shoulder as they shook along the commuting train, holding on to its hanging straps for stability. They were admittedly an odd pair, and perhaps due to how much they stood out, Yua had been feeling constant gazes coming from all around her. It would stand to reason this was why she was repeatedly fidgeting with her hair and glasses. She was still not yet acquainted enough with the detective, Bond, to strike up a casual conversation with him. She had only met him a few days prior, after all. Shinjuku was only a single station away from Shibuya, and yet, the 3 minutes it took to reach there felt helplessly longer than they should have. Bond simply stood silently, gazing out the window. He made no attempt to speak with Yua. Yua's current impression of Bond was that he did not seem to be a bad person, but that he was still somewhat frightening. She had met our detectives that were on the case involving her sister, but none of them had left an especially good impression. Perhaps I had left her with an unconscious prejudice against detectives, by extension, Bond. Or so she had concluded in her introspection.
だから地下15階の番人倒せば隠しダンジョン行けるだろ常識的に考えて
番人どこにいるかわからんなり
Ever since the two of them had boarded the train at Shinjuku Station, two men standing near the door had been talking in an excessively loud manner. Regardless of her desires, Yua was forced to listen to those two talking loud as could be, all without an ounce of consideration for those around them.
マップの左端の方だよ。一目でわかるだろ、万人。
Use your eyeballs, son!
っていうか、万人と警官の区別つかないぞな、もし。
Ah, come on, there must be a pixel or two out of place between the two.
いやいや、どう見ても万人だろ。どこが警官なんだよ。万人は銃持ってねえよ。
God, they're talking about as though their lives depend on it. Both of them wore plain clothes, bandanas, fingerless gloves, and bulging rucksacks on their backs. The two were a pair of so-called otakus. Yu herself was interested in, and thus consumed both anime and manga, so it was not their appearances that left her surprised. She had simply never been to Akihabara before, so it was her first time seeing a stereotypical otaku, complete with the clothes and everything. These are your people, Yua! Really, realizing her curious glances were quite rude, she quickly averted her eyes. In a seat directly in front of her, a high school girl with brown hair and a navy blue blazer was typing a message on her cell phone. Her gaudy artificial nails tapped the screen rapidly, and every time her fingers moved, her cell phone strap of a pistol swung back and forth. Naturally, Yu had seen the contents of her message. This was not through any fault of her own, however. The girl was holding her phone horizontally, giving everyone around her free rein to see everything she wrote. It was so easy to see, in fact. It was almost as if she wanted Yua to see it. I can't read this. I think I can make out a few English words in some of these things, like, what to, and couldn't, annoying, so annoying. Like, Jesus, I can barely make sense of this. What is this, leet speak or something? Despite being a high school girl herself, Yua could not even begin to grasp the contents of the message. It was possible that it could have been Gauru speak, but to her, it looked like nothing short of a coded message. All of a sudden, the voice of a child rang throughout the train's interior. Startled, Yua turned toward the source of the sound. A lone boy, about 5 years of age, stood right beside Bond. He held a squirt gun in his hand, its muzzle pointed straight at Bond. The boy even pulled the trigger, but no water came out from the end of it. I was about to say, aim for his pants! Bond gave the child a big smile. His eyes, meanwhile, told a different story. However, despite the message Bond attempted to convey, the child showed no intention of stopping. A woman, likely his mother, rushed to her son's side. She turned toward Bond and politely bowed. The mother scolded her son in an attempt to make him stop, but her reprimanding never extended beyond verbal. She did not take the water gun from him, nor did she attempt to grab his hand. Now, milady, you need to use more than just words in this circumstance. You need to use your fingers and whisk it away. Oh, he sees it, and that's exactly why he's doing it. To Yua, the scene seemed very unnatural. The mother was clearly angry at her child, and showed an apologetic demeanor toward Bond. but that was the only thing normal about it.
やめなさい、怒るわよ。
The boy remained completely indifferent and unresponsive, simply choosing to repeat the same word over and over again. And yet, despite his inaction, the mother made no attempts to stop him with anything other than words.
本当にすいません。バンバンバン。
And for some reason, Bond simply sat there and let the boy do as he pleased.
Bam! Bam! Bam!
If I knew for a fact it wouldn't get me into any sort of legal trouble, this would be the perfect opportunity to take a cup of water that you may be holding in your hand right at that very instant and pouring it over the kid's head. That would teach him. Again, it'd likely get you in trouble, but it would certainly teach the kid. Maybe. Oh, whoops, I forgot to read that. In the end, the scene continued on until they arrived at Shibuya Station. Upon coming to a full stop at the station, the train doors opened, but the mother and son showed no signs that they intended to disembark. Relieved, Yua exited onto the platform along with Bon. Taking a peek at his expression, she saw a clearly forced smile sitting upon his face. How does it feel to be Swiss cheese now, Detective Bon?
お急ぎ中のお客様にお知らせいたします。地下鉄番号門線。失礼しました。半蔵門線は人身事故の影響でただいま振り替え運転を行っております。
Why am I getting an ominous feeling?
お客様には大変ご迷惑をおかけして申し訳ございません。
最近よく感じるんだが。
A crowd of people came and went through the platform. As Bond walked through along with that crowd toward the Hachiko gate, he began whispering to Yua.
まるで不特定多数の人間にストーカーされてるような気がするんだよな。
That would certainly explain that, what we just heard, wouldn't it?
どういうことですか？
さっきみたいなことがよくあるって話さ。
Wait a minute, was that child actually threatening us or something? And was that girl who was typing that weird message on her phone actually sending a coded message to other people who may or may not be following us? Is that woman over on the left with the yellow handbag? Does she actually contain a laser gun in there and she's going to use it to vaporize us? It's like the old familiar slogan from the X-Files. Trust no one.
周囲の人間の何気ない行動がまるで自分への嫌がらせじゃねえかって思えてくるわけ。
This was the reason why Bond had shown no reaction to the boy's mischief. Events such as those, ones that did not present much trouble, were becoming an everyday occurrence for him. Once he had begun picking up on it, it made it difficult for him to stay of sound mind.
考えすぎだろうが、俺みたいな地味なおっさんに興味があるやつなんてそうそういねえだろうし。
Don't discount that detective instinct of yours, man. That's like your best asset. Seriously, don't do it.
ただ、集団ストーカーってのは確かに存在するんだよな。
Oh yeah, I believe it. Well, rather, I know it. Gang stalking, an organized form of stalking. Despite what the name implies, it does not mean that a group of people simply follow a victim. Instead, it refers to repeat minor offenses, often various forms of harassment, perpetrated against an individual by several individuals. In some cases, the harassment is done with such utter sophistication, the victim has no way to perceive the many incidents as connected. So it's just like social media. Whenever you piss off Twitter or Reddit or what have you. Specific examples of this harassment may include a victim being repeatedly bumped into by various people they don't know, a car honking endlessly in front of the victim's house late at night, people the victim has never met before alluding to private information only the victim should know, etc. Even though each of these offenses are not a cause for worry when viewed alone. You think that people knowing things who never met the victim before, alluding to private information that only the victim should know, is not a cause for concern when viewed on its own? I disagree. Moving on. Even though each of these offenses are not a cause for worry when viewed alone, if they continue to occur for several times a day over the course of several months, the victim will begin to deteriorate mentally. This eventually results in the victim growing terrified of everything around them, even the most mundane things that weren't actually intended to be part of the stalking effort, and no longer be able to trust anyone. I noticed this little thing here is cream-colored. Is there some tips I've missed? Okay, no, it's just it's just where the tips are, where the index currently is. Got it. Got it.
普通のストーカー行為とは何が違うんですか？
被害を受けてる側からすると、相手の意図や目的、正体すら全く分かんねえんだ。ただ、誰かに行く先々で毎日のように様々な嫌がらせを受けていると感じる。集団ストーカーってのはそういうもんだ。
ただの考えすぎっていう可能性は？
Well, considering that Nozomi's got this army of porters wandering all around Shibuya, I would not really be all that surprised if they also got a bunch of randos under their payroll that have been given orders to just fuck with dear old Bon here. Which I would assume it would be the case, because I can't think of any other big group that would be able or willing or desire to do such a thing.
十分にあり得るだろうな。脅迫観念と紙一重だ。俺の場合はそうでもなさそうなんだけどな。ここ数日は相手もかなり直接的な手段に出てきてやがる。
と言いますと？
手を引けって脅迫する匿名の電話が何度かかかってきてな。
For some reason, Bon laughed as he told her that. Yua, however, was frightened, and wrapped her arms around herself in an attempt to bring her comfort.
それ大丈夫なんですか？
まあ、デカにはよくあることさ。
Upon saying that, Bon immediately stiffened his expression and looked at Yua.
ユアちゃんは最近そんなようなことはないかい？
はい、ないと思います。
身の回りでちょっとでも違和感を覚えることがあったらすぐにおじさんに言ってくれ。ユアちゃんの身の安全を守るのは警察の仕事だからな。
はい。
Having listened to his words, Yua realized she was involved in something far more dangerous than she could have imagined.
あなたは妄想の存在なんだよ。
I was right. I was actually right. Her voice a whisper, Rimi said something nonsensical. Ignoring what she'd said, I glanced at the various houses around me. In this place well rooted in my memories. In this place I couldn't seem to recognize. Houses that should have been there were nowhere to be seen. Houses that shouldn't have been there were all I could see. The gap, the disparity between what I knew in my memories and the real scenery surrounding me was getting wider and wider. Yelling those thoughts aloud, I desperately denied the despair welling up in my heart. Yeah, there wasn't any gap. Not in the slightest. I'd just taken a wrong turn. Just wasn't the right street. It was just a misunderstanding on my part. There was nothing wrong with the world. To think otherwise would be ridiculous. Stumbling my way back down the street I'd come from, I burst into the neighboring alleyway. But just as I'd feared, between my memories and what I actually saw, something felt out of place. I realized that my entire body was soaked in sweat. My eyes refused to focus, and my feet didn't feel well secured to the ground. All those feelings together hit me with an intense wave of nausea.
なんでだよ。ここに僕の家があるのは間違いないんだ。僕はいつもここから小学校にも中学校にも通ってたんだ。小学校にはナナミと手をつないで登校してたし、中学は自転車で。
どこの中学校？
Rimi, who had been following me, quietly asked a simple question.
どこって？
なんていう学校？
Wait a minute. I just remembered. Bon and Sua went to an elementary school earlier in the story to investigate Takumi, didn't they? Now, I mean that the information about they had to get that information about Takumi and his elementary school from somewhere, right? So if I don't actually exist, then how did they get that information? Was it on some kind of public data? Was it on some kind of police or public database that they had access to that was just doctored or something? Or did the Takumi that Bon and Sua were investigating during that point actually end up being Shogun, and they didn't know it, or by extension me? I feel like I'm missing something here.
そんなの決まってるじゃないか、地元の。
It's...
あれ、
I couldn't remember. I'd gone to middle school. I had clear memories of it, but I couldn't remember any of the finer details. It was as if some haze was covering my mind. The name of my middle school, which class I'd been part of, or even the name of my homeroom teacher. No specific names came to me.
そんなはずないんだ。ただ忘れてるだけで。
タク、聞いて。あなたの記憶にあるのは、この場所に家があるじゃなくて、この場所に家があるはずっていう思い込み。そうでしょ？
My sanity was hanging on by a thread.
だって僕はここに来るまでの道は覚えてるんだぞ。おかしいじゃないか。
それは作られた記憶だから。
Stop making that face! Rimi's eyes were pointed straight at the ground, and she looked terribly sad. Without looking up at me, she just continued saying the most confusing, nonsensical things. Things that, once again, I didn't understand. Things that were impossible to understand. So I stopped trying.
タクは中学には通ってないの。
わかったぞ。これドッキリでしょ。そうなんでしょ。きっとあれだ。そう、リミとナナミが実は知り合いとかで僕を二人して騙そうとしてるんじゃ。なんだ。そうかそうか。ビビった。
I tried my best to laugh it off, but Rimi didn't even so much as chuckle.
ごめん。私これからあなたを傷つけることを言わなくちゃ。タク、あなたはね、本来いちゃいけない存在なんだよ。
嘘つくな。
She was just trying to deceive me. Rimi was my enemy, just like all the others.
貼り付けはリミの仕業だな。
If that was true, then what happened at the crime scene when I first met her hadn't been a delusion. The true culprit behind Newgen wasn't the man I'd seen in the hospital TV earlier today. It was Rimi. She had been monitoring me the entire time. She knew I'd witnessed everything, so she refused to let me out of her sight. Also, I would never tell anyone else what I'd seen. That was the sole reason she'd bothered staying with me all this time.
君あの時血まみれだった。だから君が犯人だ。
あれはあなたの望んだ妄想。ギガロマニアックスの妄想はね、強すぎる場合時に混じり合うの。妄想がシンクロするんだ。
Calmly, as though she was talking to herself, Rimi spoke. And yet her composure only served to piss me off even more. Oh.
少なくともあの時、あの場所では4つの妄想がシンクロしてた。
4 delusions. I'm gonna go with green.
タクと私とニュージェネの犯人と。
信じるもんか。
Before she could continue, I cut her off. I then covered my ears and closed my eyes.
これは妄想だ。そうだよ、妄想なんだ。いつもしているみたいな。
これ以上妄想しちゃダメ。
My mind, still trying to delude itself, was forcefully ripped back to reality by Rimi's words. How dare you? I'm under a lot of stress. I need a happy fantasy to manage this stress. You're not helping.
出ないと私タクを消さなくちゃいけなくなる。
殺すの？
A chill ran down my spine. My perception of Rimi, the girl I thought would save me, was rapidly spiraling. Now she was turning into someone completely unrecognizable to me.
殺すんだな。やっぱり君が殺人犯なんだ。
So why? Why did she look so... Biting her lip as she fought back tears, hanging her head low as could be. It made me hesitant to accuse her of anything. Tell me it's a lie. Tell me it's all a prank so we can laugh it off. If you do, we can go back to how it used to be between us. I want to go back.
だったら僕は何なの？
ギガロマニアックスの妄想によって作られた人間かな。
バカらしい。僕にはちゃんと記憶があるんだ。中学の頃の細かい記憶は思い出せないけど、忘れちゃっただけで。
あなたが生まれたのは1年半前なの。
A year and a half ago. That would have been just when I started high school.
だったら僕は1歳半の赤ん坊っていうことじゃないか。バブ言ってなくちゃおかしい。
タクは生まれた瞬間からタクだった。
君がその目で見たって言いたいの？確かに僕らは1年半前から友達だったらしいね。僕は覚えてないけど。
私とあなたが会ったのは1ヶ月前。貼り付けの現場。私はもともと水明の生徒じゃないから。
Rimi was a complete schizo. A complete and utter schizo. Just like all the others. You know, I just thought of something. If my delusion ended up merging with hers and the new gen culprits right when I found the crucifixion scene, then that would explain the discrepancy that I saw between what the police reported on the crime and what I personally saw, both at the scene itself and in the pictures that Shogun showed me. It wasn't the police's perception of the crime that was wrong. It was mine. And also thinking about it now, I guess that kind of blows a massive hole in my theory about Sua being Darth Spider, doesn't it? Well, Sua, you're not completely out of the ballpark. You're not completely out of the woods yet, as far as I'm concerned, especially given your ringtone and all that. But I can't exactly deny the possibility that you are probably innocent, and if it turns out that you are, then I want to apologize in advance for suspecting you. Anyway, back to the story. Rimi was a complete schizo. A complete and utter schizo. Just like all the others. No, not just a schizo. Super schizo. She was at a tier not even Sena or Iyase could hope to match.
誰が僕を妄想したの？言ってみてよ。
西條匠くんだよ。
入ったアウト。僕が妄想なんでしょ。その僕が妄想して僕を作ったって矛盾してるじゃないか。はい、論破終了。
So Shogun and Takumi are one and the same after all.
それとも君の妄想？君が勝手に作り出した君だけの脳内設定なんでしょ。僕はそれに巻き込まないでよ。
私だってタクには してほしくなかった。ここにも来てほしくなかった。もっと強く引き止めればよかったね。
Then, gathering her resolve, Rimi raised her head and looked straight at me. Her eyes glimmered with sincerity. It didn't seem like she was lying. She felt entirely genuine. Wait a minute. You know who the new gen culprit is. Since you claimed that my delusion also mixed with the culprits. Who are they? And what's your relation to the culprit?
でも、ここまで来たら、本当のことを知ってもらった方がいいと思う。
But it wasn't the truth. It was all a lie. It had to be. Otherwise, my last thread of sanity would snap. Besides, who would ever believe someone who suddenly decided to hit them with, "Oh yeah, BT dubs, I know I'm saying that wrong. Oh yeah, by the dubs, you're a delusion."
あなたの行動が他の人の命を削っていくんだって知ってもらった方が。
そうだ。ナナミは
Everything I do is slowly chipping away at someone else's life, you said? I assume you mean Shogun, aka aka the other Takumi.
僕が妄想だったら、僕と血が繋がってるナナミも両親も妄想ってこと？そんなの無茶苦茶。
ナナちゃんはいるよ。
From the way Rimi talked about her, it was almost as if she knew her.
ナナミを誘拐したのは君なの。
似たようなものかもね。
What is that supposed to mean?
私はタクを守ることに気を取られすぎて、ナナちゃんが狙われる可能性を考えてなかった。私は誘拐犯のこと知ってる。
She really was a demon girl. I was right. I'd always been right. Rimi was the only one I'd wanted to be on my side. And even though I'd always believed that, there had always been more than enough reasons to doubt her. And yet, even so, I'd feigned ignorance and simply trusted that she'd keep her promise to stay by my side. But despite all that, just like Yua, Rimi was.
君も僕を裏切るんだね。
そうだね。私はタクを裏切った。隠し事たくさんしてた。ごめんね。私のこと恨んでいいよ。
謝られたって僕は信じない。信じられない。
Despite my words, it was impossible for me to prove that I was real. All the supernatural things I'd seen up until now flashed through my mind, and that's when I knew I couldn't just laugh off her words as some insane asspull. As I thought that, Rimi slowly began to approach me, and then embraced me. Taken completely by surprise, I surrendered myself to her. I could feel her warmth. She had saved me. She had saved my soul. She had taught me nothing but kindness. But now, despite being the center of her embrace, Her warmth could not have felt more distant.
そろそろ行かなきゃ。
行くってどこへ？
ナナちゃんをさらった誘拐犯のところ。決着つけなくちゃいけないの。ナナちゃんのことも他のことも。このままだとタクも守りきれないし。
そんなの無責任だ。僕にここまでひどいこと言っておいて逃げるの？
Rimi started inching away from me. One step, then another. Slowly, she distanced herself.
戻ってくるからタクは部屋にいて。そしたらまた一緒にいろいろ楽しいお話ししよう。あなたはあそこにいてもいいんだよ。
Not really. It's not okay at all. It's about as far from okay as it can really get. Let's be real here. Such a gentle tone. Even though she had said all those cruel things. Why was she still being so nice to me?
でも一つだけ約束。もう妄想はしない。ね。タクの妄想力はとっても強いから。妄想すればするほど本物のあなたの命が削られていっちゃうんだ。
何を？
それじゃあまた明日。石。
So all this time, every time I triggered a delusion trigger, I've been whittling away at Shogun's life? Rimi struck a pose, saluting me with the most unnatural smile on her face. It could not have been more forced. And only a moment later, from her eyes, quiet tears began to fall. Rimi frantically turned her back to me, and as her shoulders started to tremble, she ran away. And I, having been left behind in a stupor, sank helplessly to my knees.
本物の僕ってなんだよ。僕は偽物じゃない。
All color vanished from the world. All hope I'd once had was gone. My very existence had been denied. There was no meaning in me being here. Not even my death held any meaning. Rimi had left me, leaving behind a meaningless husk. She was my enemy. She had deceived me. And now, having said her piece, she had probably lost her final remaining reason to be with me.
戻ってくるはずない。
Rimi had abandoned me. But of course she had. I was a delusionary existence, according to her. A monster. Forget it. I didn't care anymore. With no willpower to even stand up, I just stayed there, still unable to organize my thoughts, incapable of crying due to the sheer shock. The twilight wind robbed me of all warmth, and the very little that remained of Rimi's faded completely. As I looked up the sky for no particular reason, I gazed at the sunset. A sunset that had almost been completely eroded by the dark of night.
これが新作？またへんてこね。
Oh, my sweet lord. There's just a lot for me to process here. I actually want to sit down for a few minutes and just think over everything that I've just learned, but I think I'm just going to save all the extra processing for later. I think I'll just see whatever this particular scene we have here is, and then call it quits for today. So, what's going on? More crazy developments. Momose smiled as she stared fixedly at the Jero Froggy keychain Bon had just purchased.
でも可愛いじゃない？
そりゃ新作じゃねえよ。先週出たなんだっけ。
Bon glanced over at you as if pleading for help.
涙目ゲロカエルンです。
ああ、そうそうそう。それ。
ごめんね、ゆあちゃん。こんなむさ苦しいおじさんに付き合わされて大変だったでしょう。
It's okay. Some kid shot him up for her troubles.
いえ。
ひでえな、ももちゃん。こんなダンディーな中年はなかなかいねえぜ。
With Bon's half-joking protests falling on deaf ears, the president of Frisia served Yua some tea. Having a deep sigh, Bon sat down on a chair and glanced around the office. The employees of Frisia, who usually worked well into the night, had actually returned home on time today. Each worker's schedule was arranged to tell this exact tale on the whiteboard. Thanks to their departures, despite the sun having only just set, the office was completely silent, as if this were the dead of night. I just thought of something. Rimi referred to the new gen culprit, and I'm guessing also the kidnapper, assuming they're the same person. In a way, as if she flat out said that she knew who they were, and that they didn't expect, and that she also said that they didn't expect they would go as far as to target Nozomi. And given the interactions we have with the kidnapper, right when they issued that challenge to us, Rimi must be the new gen culprit's co-conspirator, as it were, or partner. Is that what I can take from this? So that would prove that Bon was right, that there was likely more than one culprit at play. So and I don't even think she even retorted, or she didn't even try to retort not gonna be calling her a murderer either, come to think of it. So that would mean that she's one of them. One of the new gen killers, along with whoever this other person is. This whole damn time, I've been hanging out with one of the new gen killers. Thanks to their departures, despite the sun having only just set, the office was completely silent, as if it were the dead of night.
で、ももちゃん、進行のこと調べてくれたかい?
Before riding the train from Shinjuku, Bon had called Momose in advance and asked her to look into FaithWorks.
その前に
Smile still on her face, Momose glanced over at Yua, who was sipping from her teacup.
ゆあちゃん、 お茶を飲んだら帰った方がいいわ。
え？
日も暮れたし、ご両親が心配するでしょ。
Yua realized what the intent behind Momose's words were. Whatever the conversation that would soon take place was, it was not meant for Yua's ears.
私のこと心配してくれているんですか？
ええ、そうよ。
Momose nodded with a serious look on her face. Although thankful for her consideration, Yua shook her head definitively in response.
私、帰りません。ミヤちゃんの死の真相に近づくためなら何だってするつもりです。
あなたはこれ以上関わるべきじゃないわ。
私もとっくに当事者の一人です。
An imposing, unwavering resolve dwelt within Yua's words. Momose was perplexed at the unexpected opposition.
意外と頑固ね。
ま、ここでのけ者にするのも酷ってもんだろ。いざとなったら警察で保護するさ。
Momose was forced to sigh in response to Bon's nonchalant attitude.
バンちゃんにそんな権力があるのかしらね。
ま、こう見えても一応天下の警視庁捜査一課所属だからな。
あら、そう。
Could have fooled me too. Upon pacifying Bon to a suitable degree, Momose stared intently at Yua.
これから聞くことは絶対に口外しちゃダメよ。これはあなたの命にも関わることだから、それを肝に銘じてね。
あ、はい。
Yua nodded, her expression far stiffer than before. Upon seeing that, Momose sighed once more, then proceeded to take a seat. Momose, hunching her already rotund body forward, operated the mouse connected to her laptop.
で、進行から何が出たんだい？
バンちゃんの予感的中って感じね。
Both Bon and Yua appeared at the monitor from behind Momose.
有限会社新興の親会社はのぞみテクノロジーよ。
のぞみテクノロジ
ー？のぞみグループか。こいつは驚きだな。
新興は5年前にのぞみグループに吸収合併されたんだけど、それ以降発売した商品が次々と大ヒットしてるのよ。
I'm just reading over what the page says. I don't think I'm going to read it out loud. Doesn't look like there's anything particularly important to really say. Just plain old advertising of the mysterious froggies that may or may not also, well, what do I mean may not? I think are playing a role in the apocalypse.
ゲロカイルンだけじゃないの。中国製バッグとかタイ製のエコバッグとか美脚パンツとかで、この会社は商品の売り出し方が独特なの。いつも週末に新製品を一斉に投入するのよ。
Weekends again, I see. Weekends. That word stuck out especially to Bon.
G レートとの関係は？
必然にしろ偶然にしろ、新興の商品がヒットしているのは G レートの変動の影響ね。それは確かよ。前に見せた G レートのグラフ覚えてる？ 5 年ぐらい前からずっと毎週末に値が上がってるって言ったわよね。新興がのぞみグループに合併された時期とぴったり一致するわ。
新興がレートを操作してると思うか？
新興自体はそんなに大きな会社じゃないから、それは無理よ。
となると親会社のぞみが怪しいな。グループ総出で取り組めばレート操作だってできそうじゃねえか。
待って、のぞみの方はもちろんだけど、信仰が興味深いのはそこだけじゃないの。設立当初の資料にまで遡ってみたら、すごい大物が出てきたのよ。
大物？
井ノ原幸三。
はっは、明和党の重鎮じゃねえの。
信仰設立当時はまだ民自党在籍時代だけどね。
つながってきたな。太田教授の時、それとこの前の地震の時、明和党は G レートに関係ありそうな件について報道規制の圧力をかけてきてる。
G レートのグラフのことだけど、いろいろ調べてたら他にも面白いパターンを見つけたわ。
As of now, there were two aspects about the GE rates that Momose had her attention on. First, the fact that they consistently rose each and every weekend. The maximum values themselves were not particularly notable, but aside from New Year's, Golden Week, and the Bond Festival, they always went up without fail. And second, the drastic rise following earthquakes. For both the quake 2 months ago, in which there were 8 fatalities, and the quake 1 week ago, in which there were more than 100 fatalities, the GE rate had shown extreme upsurge for a short period of time.
で、3つ目のパターン。この5年で4回だけ起きてるわ。時期はどれもまちまち。上昇値は地震の時ほどじゃないけど、結構高いの。最初はこれが何を意味してるのかわからなかったんだけど、調べていくうちにこの5年で4回と符合するイベントに行き着いた。
イベント？
もったいぶらずに教えろよ。
選挙よ。衆参合わせて4度行われた選挙日と、その4回の GE レート上昇の日は完全に同じだったわ。
Bond stroked his unshaven chin with a stern look on his face.
野党だった明和党が大躍進を遂げて与党になった選挙は
4年前ですね。
So you're saying that they utilized the GE rates in order to manipulate the public's perception of them to the point to where they were able to be voted into power?
そして井ノ原幸三が民自党を電撃的に離党して明和党に移ったのは5年前。
A heavy silence hung in the air around the three of them.
なんだか私、お話を聞いていたら怖くなってきました。
I think a little bit is greatly underselling it, Yua. Yua's voice trembled slightly as she murmured.
私もびっくりだわ。ここまでキーワードがぴったり当てはまるなんてね。
まだ状況証拠でしかないがな。それでも G レートのことを知っていたからこそ気づけたわけだ。知らなかったらさっぱりだったろ。
As he said that, Bond nonchalantly retrieved his favorite handheld fan and began waving it at himself.
ところで、俺が調べた女子高生の生態について話していいかい？
Momose, bewildered by Bond's sudden change of topics, stared daggers at the detective.
あのね、いきなりそんなくだらないこと言い出すんじゃないわよ。ゆあちゃんがいるんだから少しは考えなさい。
ね、そういうなって。
Slight smirk colored Bond's face, but his eyes did not match such a sentiment.
青井瀬名についてだ。
I had a feeling it was her.
正しくは畑野瀬名と言うべきか。なぜか最近になって母親の旧姓を使い始めたんだよな。その畑野瀬名の父親、畑野一世は今失踪して行方不明らしいんだが、 のぞみテクノロジーの元社員なんだよ。
どういうこと？
どういうことも何も、そのまんまさ。
Nozomi Technology was a company that primarily developed software for use in medical equipment. The Nozomi Group had begun with Nozomi Technology, but through repeated mergers and acquisitions had become one of Japan's top leading conglomerates.
半年前、畑野瀬名の母親と生後1年の妹が謎の死を遂げている。父親の失踪はその直後だ。畑野瀬名本人もそれと前後して当時預けられていたとある施設を脱走するって騒ぎを起こした。
施設ですか？
天神寮っていう非営利の自立更生支援施設だ。表向きはな。
表向きってじゃあ裏があるの？
スポンサーがいるのさ。これが天聖振興会だったりする。
天聖振興会。
Momose grimaced at those words. She then spoke once more, her tone now clearly exasperated.
また面倒な名前が出てきたわね。
ちなみにその天神寮は2年前まで別の名前だった。アークハートメディカル会。
Arc Heart Medical. The same place that Ayase was at.
どんな偶然か、今や渋谷の若者のカリスマ的存在であるフェス。岸本綾瀬もここに入れられていたんだな。畑野瀬名とは入れ違いだったみてえだが。
Bon then leaned forward toward Momose and Yua.
でだ。ここからが興味深いんだが、アークハートメディカル会は天神寮と違ってメンタルケア施設だった。精神病患者を治療してたんだ。ところが2年前、アークハートメディカル会は突然非営利団体の自立更生支援施設天神寮へと姿を変えた。それによって精神科医が一斉に解雇されたんだが、その医師たちを丸ごと雇い入れたのが代々木にある AH 東京総合病院だった。
ノータリン事件で殺された人が勤めていたのってそこの病院でしたよね。
ああ、高階文夫。確かに AH 東京総合病院の精神科医だ。ついでに言うと、そこの病院長は井ノ原と懇意らしいぜ。
Thinking about it now, one of Takumi's memories where he remembers whenever he remembered visiting said doctor when he was supposedly younger. I wonder if that memory is actually real.
また井ノ原議員ね。
ゆあちゃん、君が追ってた西条匠も実は AH 東京総合病院をこの1ヶ月で3回訪れてる。
そうなんですか？
警察がずっと尾行してたんだよね。確かだ。しかも西条には数年前にその病院に入院した記録まであった。彼の主治医は高階文夫だ。不思議なのは西条の入院記録なんだよな。彼は10歳で入院して約2年後にその記録が途切れてるんだが、退院した記録はなかった。
誰かが改ざんしたのかしら。
どうだかな。そこまでは調べが回らなくてね。なあ、それと畑野瀬名に関してもう一つ。最近彼女がよく行動を共にしている折原梢って生徒がいる。1ヶ月ほど前に転校してきた西条のクラスメートなんだが、この子も結構ないわくつきなんだ。 折原の父親がのぞみグループの系列会社社員なわけよ。
Oh, really?
元は広島の方に住んでてな。折原梢の同級生3人が何者かに襲われて重傷を負うって事件が起きてる。
Well, if her father was also an employee of Nozomi, that would definitely explain how Nozomi was able to get their hands on Kozupi too.
3人ともが右腕を鋭利な刃物で切断されて、ひどいありさまだったらしい。折原もその場に居合わせていた。彼女が犯人じゃねえかって疑いがかかったんだが、凶器が存在しないって理由で逮捕はされてない。それで地元に居づらくなって引っ越したって噂もある。
凶器が存在しない？見つからないじゃなくて？
存在しないだ。何で切られたのかさえ分かってない。犯行は折原以外には実行できない状況だった。だがたとえ折原が犯人だとしても、凶器をどこからか取り出すこともどこかに隠すことも不可能だった。かまいたち現象じゃないかなんて本気で議論されたぐらいだ。
何もないところから剣を取り出す手品
かもしれねえな。
君が悪いです。
Yua, as if trying to stop herself from trembling, hunched down toward her knees, then began to stroke both her arms of her hands.
何かとても大きな意志が働いているような。
職業柄俺は陰謀論なんざ信じちゃいねえんだが、今回ばかりはその存在を信じそうになるね。明和とそしてのぞみグループ G レートに関係してると思われるのはその2つか。
天聖振興会も叩けば埃が出てきそうね。もともとあまりいい噂は聞かないし。
Sipping some of her tea, Momose shrugged her shoulders.
バンちゃんには呆れるわ。本来の仕事をほったらかしにしてこんなことを調べてたなんて。
元はといえばももちゃんが G レートのことを教えてくれたのがいけないんだぜ。
そうだけど、それで捜査本部から外されちゃったら世話ないわ。本当に不器用なんだから、あんたって人は。
Those words were neither those of astonishment nor of condemnation, but rather a fairly roundabout way of praising him. Momose, despite her words, acknowledged Bon in his pursuits.
おっと、電話だ。
Bon's cell phone let out an electronic tune. Looking at the display, he saw that the caller was a restricted number.
もしもし。
Loud static could be heard from the other end of the call. Bon took the phone away from his ear and looked at the display once more. His connection was good, so he was likely not the issue. It must have been the caller causing the problem. Bon brought his ear close to the phone, believing that the call was coming from some place far away.
おい、誰だ?
This is one of the anonymous, threatening phone calls he had been receiving recently. The mechanical sounding voice was likely due to the use of a voice changer. Bon let out an audible laugh before proceeding to answer.
あんたか。いい加減名乗ってくんねえかな。手を引けって言われてもな。そもそも何から手を引きゃいいんだ。そこを具体的に言ってもらわねえと。
They always hung up there, always after saying back off twice. The pattern repeated itself so often, it was practically routine. No matter how much Bon tried to speak to them, there was never an answer. But on this day, that would finally change.
ああ 誰だ？
Suwa? Upon hearing that, Bond finally understood whose distressed voice it was on the other end of the call.
Suwaか? 誰にやられた？今どこにいる？
わからないっす。黒い目出し帽って。
相手は一人なんだな。おい、大丈夫なのか？
助けて、先輩。自分は英一と。
スワ、おい、スワ。
At the hospital? No matter how much Bond called out to him, there was no response from the other end of the call. With a click of his tongue, Bond hung up. But Mose and Yu were looking at Bond with intense concern.
スワちゃんに何かあったの？
Bond stood up, then lightly slapped his cheeks twice.
スワが人質に取られた。どうやら AH 東京総合病院にいるみてえだ。
まさか名和と？
ああ、わかんないが。このままじゃまずい気がする。
応援を頼んだ方がいいわ。
You really
した
should.
らそれこそスワの命はねえよ。俺一人で様子を見てくれ。
Have a sniper handy at least. At least they can stay hidden and from a distance. Bond placed his favorite handheld fan on top of the table, close to where Momose's hands rested. Following this, he took a good, long look at each of the girls. His demeanor was like that of an entirely different person's. The unreliable middle-aged detective that he had so often played was nowhere to be seen. All there was now was an intense, fearless expression on his face.
ももちゃんとゆあちゃんもどこかに身を隠せ。わかったな。
AH General, huh? I have a feeling that when we come back to this, whatever big event we're going to be presented with next time, we're going to be going right there. I feel like I'm also on the cusp of another big revelation. I wish I had more to say about all the stuff that we've learned, but right now I really don't. It's just a lot to take in. I'm just trying to make sense of the information I have now and comparing it to my memories of everything that I've seen up until this point. Finding things that match, finding things that seem inconsistent with what I remember, anything that could help me explain, help me better understand what's going on here. But I think this is something I'm just going to need time here to really sit and ponder about for a while. If I'm likely to notice anything else, that is. At least before we come back to the next episode of this. I'm not gonna lie. I feel genuinely very awful for Takumi right now. Like, I can't even imagine the despair that one would feel after being presented with all of that, and having more than enough evidence to believe that such a revelation actually has some truth to it. I could not even begin to guess what I would do if I found out that I wasn't a real person. The life that I thought I've lived up until now was a fabrication, and I was born from someone else's delusions. How is any person really supposed to respond to something like that, other than just shutting down or going stark raving mad? Like I said, I got a lot of stuff to think about before we come back to all this. And if I think of anything else that might be worth bringing up next time we come back, I'll try to bring it up here when we start the next episode. That being said, I hope everybody enjoyed this latest episode of Chaos Head Noah. If you did, and you want to see more content from me, feel free to hit that like button and subscribe. And I gotta go unwind for a bit. Get my mind off this emotional roller coaster that I've been on for the past couple hours. Take care, everyone.